Hey everyone, so I've got another update on my Space Arcade stuff. Last time I was talking about how there was the potential for projectiles to pass through ships if there was like a frame rate hitch. So if the projectile was flying towards a ship and it hit a frame rate hitch, and then after the frame rate hitch, the delta time put the projectile over here, it could have went through the ship. And the solution I wanted to try to code up was to have it stretch between time point to time point. So I've done most of that work. I still haven't hooked up the actual collision test yet because I don't have a well-configured shape for these ships, so that'll be next, but I can show you the work behind the projectiles at least. So if I go back to this projectile editor that I created, we now have this space where we can view a projectile. There's a coordinate system, so that's the x-axis, the red, and the green is the y-axis, and there's a blue axis within this model. And so that's your XYZ and the origins there. The collision model needs to have its collision shape synced up to it, so we can render that. And currently the shape is at the origin, but we need to make it fit to the model, so I did some math to do that. And I can get into that if people are interested. But so now that it fits, that's great. But what we really kind of needed was for the model to go from start point to end point, and currently the model is centered around its current position and not its start point end point. So what I wanted was for the tip of the model to actually be at its end point. And so I can offset the model by half the distance that it's going to stretch, and now the tip is at the origin. And so we can do the same thing for the collision. And now we have a model that we've simulated what the model will look like if it was stretching from this point to this point. And I can adjust the scale, and the collision box still matches the model. So if I go to my other tab, which is the simulation of delta time, the green squares are each frame's endpoint. And so we got the very start, and then the end of the first frame, the end of the second frame, and the end of the third frame. And I can control the simulated lag between them. So if I increase the delta time from the first frame, you can see it's stretching the projectile between the two. So the mathematics are working out. And then I could make the frame rate for the next frame really quick for some reason. Make it very small. And then I can also make the last one very large. And then we can watch the projectile as it travels through these 3 frames by clicking through the frames. And so that should mean the projectile can never skip through any space along its path. I can also adjust the speed and like rotation of the projectile that I'm firing, and position of the start point. So this was mostly just to help me make sure all the math was correct before throwing it into the actual game. And so now that I can see all the math is correct, I implemented it in the game, and there's still some refactoring that will need to be done, but we can take a look at what that looks like. It looks almost exactly the same, unfortunately, so it's not that much to see, but now I'm shooting stretching projectiles, and since we have a pretty solid frame rate, there's no issues. But they do theoretically stretch, and you could increase the speed and potentially have a laser stretch across the screen. Though it might thin out the projectile, so that you might need to adjust, like making the projectile a little more wider, so that way it's not a super thin looking laser. But yep, that's what I've been working on. And I think the next thing I'm going to do is start configuring these ships to actually have some actual shapes that kind of outline the model. I don't want to use the actual polygons in the model, but a rough approximation. So that way it's performant, but also pretty accurate. And after we have a shape for that model that can interact with the blue collision shapes around these projectiles, hopefully I can set up the collision between the projectile and the ship and have ships take damage. And then we'll see where to go from there.